Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's information session webinar for the first bid submission phase of the GASIPPP procurement program. My name is Kanyiso Zihlangu. I am the project officer at the Ipppp office. I will be directing today's session. I must say it's quite encouraging to have seen over 700 participants who have registered for today's session. These coming from bidders nationally, internationally, suppliers, the stakeholders that always support us, as well as our government partners. Now, for today, within the 2 hours that we have set for this session, we will try as much as possible to optimize the time that we have at our disposal. But in doing so, we'll just have to bear with us as the office that we will not be able to cover all the questions that have been asked prior to this session, and as well as through the Q&A session. But what we intend to do in the main today is to afford everybody on the platform, which are the potential bidders as well as the market, an opportunity to have more insight or to get more insight into the amendments that the department has made following the publication or the original publication of the RFP for this program, which, as I recall, it was on the 14th of December in 2023. Now, what will happen basically, as I've indicated, is that we'll just focus on the specific changes that we have made. So we're not going to start from scratch as we did in the last bidders conference. We believe that there's quite a lot of information that we shared back then. And then what we need to do right now is to make sure that we zoom in on the questions, or on the amendments that the potential bidders have been made. And in so doing, then we'll start off with the presentations that will be delivered by the respective leads from the Ipppp office. As you will recall, the RFP is structured in terms of Part B into 3 parts. The 3 requirements: your technical, your financial, as well as your legal. So in the main, those are the presentations that we'll be getting, because that's where most of the amendments have been made. Now, you will remember also that when you register for this session, we did ask you to indicate the specific questions, and which, thank you so much for having provided those questions. And we'll try to answer those questions as much as we can, of course, within the limited time constraints. And I must say once more that the response that we have received to our ask, it was quite overwhelming. And we hope that through this exercise, we'll be able to provide better clarity. Of course, we'll also follow through with the briefing notes as per the norm. Now, as we proceed through this 2-hour session, we also do encourage everybody on the platform to please utilize the Q&A platform or section, so that you can be able to pose your question. Unfortunately, we will not be taking verbal questions because of the time constraints. As you would recall, that's normally we're normally not able to offer that functionality because of the time constraints, especially when it comes to the webinar. Now, after that, we will then follow up after this webinar with a more detailed Q&A. So we'll collate all the questions that we have received, and then we'll put them together into a Q&A document, which will be made available to everybody. We will communicate the timelines for the responses to be provided at the end of this session. Now, of course, please do note that this session, it will be recorded. I can see it's already been recorded, and we'll make it sure that it gets shared on the Ipppp office socials. Please do follow up with our social platforms to be able to see what the session entailed, if you need to do so. Now, with that, and without first wasting much time, I will then immediately call upon our head of the office, Ms. Precious Edward, to give us a welcome address for this session, after which then I will then indicate how the program is going to unfold. Precious, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Program Director, and greetings to everybody. Thank you for joining us today in this session on the Gas Independent Power Producer Program, particularly for the GASIPPPP BW1. The purpose of this session is to brief the stakeholders and all the potential bidders on the amendments that we have communicated to the market early in October, but on the request for proposal. This briefing is intended to explain the scope of these amendments, to clarify how they should be interpreted within the context of the RFP and confirm the applicable process and the timelines going forward. The session is not intended to reopen policy determinations on the strategic intent of the program. It is rather intended to address the objective of these amendments to improve clarity, address identified risks, strengthen the possibility and the bankability and the implementability of the procurement program. Des, if I can ask you maybe to go to the next slide, that this amendment stems from the key 5 principal matters that the team will be dealing with shortly, and largely the project-on-project risks that have been identified, where we sought to address this through the load factor amendments and the timelines that we have granted the bidders through the extension of the bid submission. Similarly to the legal functionality criteria, where we've granted a time extension so that the potential bidders are able to meet these requirements. I think the load factor has been broadly covered also in the IRP. I think it's clear, and we are no longer talking to the minimum loads and the maximum loads. The policy is there, and the performance criteria technical will address those amendments in due course. The gas pricing mechanism. I think here what is important is this has already been addressed as well, and it aligns to the international practice where the team will go a bit into details into the mechanics of how this is being going to be addressed and assist the bidders going forward. Next slide, please. So the next slide talks to the timelines. I think what is important here is to take cognizance of the revised RFP submission, which is the 29th of May 2026, and the latest date for bidders to submit written questions, which is the 30th of March 2026, and the last date for the compulsory bid registration, and which is the 15th of April 2026. So I hope we're going to have a fruitful session, and we intend to address all the questions and the clarities as far as possible for the success of this program. And we hope that we will be able to try to reach that objective. Thank you.
Thank you, Precious. That was quite insightful, especially with regard to the key aspects that were raised by the potential bidders when the RFP was first issued, and which issues then we have specifically focused on in terms of the amendments of the RFP. Now, on that note, then let me then divert to our speakers of the day, the 3 speakers that I alluded to earlier, starting with Ms. Lina Mangondo. Lina is the head of legal at the Ipppp office, and she will be taking us through the legal related amendments that are reflected in the RFP, So the amendments that you will need to make sure that you fully understand in order to fulfill the legal qualification criteria that are reflected in the amendment, in the RFP amendment. Lina, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to all. I'll take you through, as indicated, through an overview of the RFP, focusing particularly on the changes that we've made to the RFP and also the legal requirements, and an overview of amendments to the PPA. Having regard to what Precious has said, an extensive consultation process was undertaken, taking into account the questions and queries that were raised by prospective bidders. And subsequent to that, the department went through a process of considering the functionality criteria for the gas Ipppp procurement program bid window 1 RFP. Having regard to that process, there was then a need to have a limited amendment to the RFP, taking into account those queries, and subsequently the amended RFP was issued to the market through a briefing note 14 on the 20th of October 2025. This was aligned with the provisions of the RFP, wherein the department reserves certain rights for itself to amend, vary, or modify any part or aspect of the RFP via briefing note. It should be noted that the structure of the RFP remains unchanged. Just for completeness, the RFP is set up in 3 elements, where you have part 1, or Part A, which essentially sets out the general requirements, rules and provisions. Part B, the functionality requirements, is split into 4 sections, with Volume 2 being the legal functionality requirements, Volume 3, technical functionality requirements, Volume 4, the financial functionality requirements, and Volume 5, the PPA and IA tables, which are also returnables to the bid submission. We then have Part C, which is the evaluation criteria requirements, split into price and economic development. As indicated, primarily the requirements of the RFP have been amended to take account of the changes related to facilities located with Umhlathuze, insofar as they have to secure fuel through the Ports Authority, and the requirements related to gas pricing. Whereas from the market, there was a concern raised around the requirements on environmental authorization. There's been no amendment to that particular provision, and bidders are still required to demonstrate that they do have environmental authorizations in place. In Part A, we have reflected those particular changes to deal with the 2 elements. Insofar as the issues were raised from the market, there was the issue of the project-on-project risk that arises as a requirement for any bidder wishing to submit bid responses for facilities within the borders of the city of Umhlathuze to secure their facility through the terminal that is procured by Transnet National Ports Authority in relation to the natural gas portal. From that respect, we've then amended that requirement, and bidders may secure fuel from other, may source their fuel from other proposed liquefied natural gas import terminals within or outside the borders of the Republic of South Africa, or from gas resources located within or outside the borders of the Republic of South Africa. So it gives bidders flexibility in that respect. I've already spoken to the fact that we have not amended the requirement in relation to environmental authorizations, and the requirement remains as it was in the RFP when it was released. There were a number of queries raised in relation to the gas pricing mechanism, and amendments have been made in relation to the monthly foreign exchange rate pass-through adjustments for US dollar. However, Elsa will speak more to that. And then also adjustments to the NERSA regulated or commercially negotiated infrastructure tariffs, trading margins, trading costs, and levies applicable to the fuel. These adjustments will be on an annual basis, or may be updated if triggered by NERSA determinations to the price per megajoule of fuel. In relation to commercially negotiated tariffing for gas, annual escalations shall be capped at CPI. Reductions will also apply where such tariffs are linked to changes in gas sales volumes or utilization of infrastructure for purposes of the projects. The fuel charge rate is to be based on the daily average of the preceding 3 months of the seller selected basket of reference commodities, with NERSA approved or commercially negotiated fuel infrastructure tariffs, margins, costs, and levies in accordance with the provisions of the PPA. Previously, bidders were required to provide confirmations from their fuel supplier in relation to the fuel supplier's consideration of the RFP and bid response insofar as they relate to fuel supply, to acknowledge reliance on the PPA for compliance and commitments to make fuel available in relation to the commitments that are made under the PPA, and for a term sheet to be submitted, which was to be initialed and signed by the bidder and fuel supplier. We have, as part of the amendment, removed the requirement for term sheets to be provided, the signed term sheets by the bidder and the fuel supplier. There's now an alternative table which is provided for fuel supply declarations in relation to LNG supply and indigenous gas. A formal declaration is required on the fuel supplier's letterhead, and this has to be duly executed by an authorized representative. Insofar as in relation to fuel that is stored, received, stored, regassed, or transported by a third party, it was initially required that bidders provide a term sheet that is initialed and signed by such bidder and the third party provider. And that requirement has been retained in relation to the term sheet being initialed and signed by the bidder and third party provider. We had a provision around the term sheet, including minimum information relating to the infrastructure capacity and regulatory matters. The clause has been amended to exclude minimum information such as details of the price for the provision of fuel, including any indexation and escalation of such fuel. We've also removed the requirement for confirmation of the date of commencement of the fuel supply in accordance with the bidder's project schedule. Principally, the fuel supply declaration sets out what needs to be provided by the fuel supplier. We would also like to point out the amendments that have been made to the PPA. Essentially, we have included a definition of actual load commitment, which means the aggregate of the monthly dispatch commitments agreed by the parties in respect of each contract year and reflected in the monthly dispatch commitment schedule pursuant to clause 6.4.2. And the minimum load commitment means which refers to the minimum load commitment in respect of each contract month multiplied by the number of days in the relevant contract month and divided by the number of days in the contract year. The concept of maximum load commitment has similarly been removed as that is no longer relevant. We've also included a provision on the dispatch schedule. This is to align with the construct of a new monthly dispatch commitment structure and removes the requirement that was in the original clause, which had a 5-year revision of the load commitment. As you know, as I alluded to, the monthly dispatch commitment is then to be calculated on a monthly basis, and it must fall within a band of 80 to 120% of the minimum monthly load commitment for each month to enable the seller to contract for monthly fuel deliveries with its appointed fuel supply. We have then removed the 5 years review cycle and also the buyer's unilateral rights to reduce the monthly commitment. The minimum load commitment has been removed. Previously, there was a 5-year review and discretion for the buyer to adjust that to 25%. We've removed that. On a rolling 3-month basis, the monthly dispatch commitments must be agreed with the seller by and this is done by issuing the monthly dispatch commitment. Whereas previously there was an option for the buyer to request dispatch below the minimum load commitment, this has been removed. And effectively, the dispatch within each month is within the 80 to 120% band of the minimum load commitment. All references that were previously there and associated obligations to maximum load commitment have been removed. Clause 12 of the PPA, which dealt with fuel and water supply, has been amended. The following is the clarification that is provided in relation to clause 12. The fuel charge rate remains based on the daily average of the preceding 3 months of the seller's selected basket of referenced commodities. The monthly foreign exchange rate passed through for adjustments to apply for in relation to fuel for US, and that is on a US, that is in relation to US dollar per megajoule denominated costs converted to rand per megajoule in accordance with the provisions of Schedule 9 and in particular clause A.8.2, and adjustments apply for changes in NERSA regulated or commercially negotiated infrastructure tariffs, trading margins, trading costs and levies in relation to the fuel, either requiring annual or NERSA driven adjustments to the rand per megajoule cost. And in relation to commercially negotiated fuel, these are capped at the escalations are capped at CPI. And obviously, then regard is required to be had to the provisions of clause A.8.2 in relation to that adjustment, and that is in Schedule 9, the payment mechanism. Whilst we are on that, Schedule 9, insofar as it relates to the fuel charge rate, and in particular the fuel indexation, the PPA has been amended to accommodate the fuel charge rate in line with international pricing practices and fixed fuel charge rate formulas under the PPA. This now allows for pass-through of gas infrastructure tariffs above the minimum load factor using the same or lower gas infrastructure tariffs. We've also had an amendment to Schedule 11, which is the unit performance requirements, which adjusts the number of starts per day and number of starts per year. But Crescent will deal more with that. We've also included clarity around the definitions in relation to the instantaneous reserve payment. There have been specific amendments there, and those are contained in Schedule 14, which deals with ancillary services. I will not go into detail around that, as I'm sure Crescent will also deal with that. In relation to, we've noted that there have been a number of clarifications from the market around the provisions in the RFP, in particular Section 4.3.1 of Part A that makes reference to approximately 2,000 megawatts of new generation capacity. It should be noted that there's a recognition that gas turbines and related heat recovery steam generator technologies have different sizing and configurations, and hence the word approximately was used. However, we do confirm that the maximum contracted capacity that will be procured under this bid window is 2,000 megawatts. Again, to illustrate that for each project, the maximum size is 1,000 megawatts. The 2,000 is available within the bid window, with a maximum project size being 1,000 megawatts. It's also, we just wanted to highlight the need for bidders to approach Eskom for a procurement program specific CEL. And whilst we've indicated the date by which bidders to apply to be 31 January 2026, this is indicative, and it remains the sole responsibility for each bidder to engage directly with the relevant grid provider to determine and comply with the grid provider's timelines and deadlines and rules and other requirements for grid connection applications, and in particular to be able to obtain a CEL in order for the bidders to ensure they can meet the requirements of the RFP. And in relation to the amendments that have been made in clause 4 of volume 2, part B of the RFP, those amendments have been there've been slight amendments just to clarify what's required in relation to that particular functionality requirement. We just give an overview here of the briefing notes that were issued. Again, some of these have been replaced by briefing note 14. Important to note that the briefing notes that have been replaced by briefing note 14 are briefing note 4, briefing note 2, briefing note 4, briefing note 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 13. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lina, for such a comprehensive outline of the amendments to the legal qualification criteria. That's a sterling job that the team has done in terms of making sure that we do respond to the queries that have been raised. Of course, it is a balancing act. We have to make sure that we also, as much as we try to respond to the queries, we also stay alive to the policy positions that have been taken by the department. Now, after Lina, then please allow me to welcome Ms. Elsa Stradom, who is the head of infrastructure finance at the Ipppp office. Elsa will then give us an outline of the amendments related to the financial qualification criteria. Over to you, Elsa. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you for that, Program Director. As indicated, I will provide more detail on the amendments that we have made with regard to the gas pricing mechanism. I think before I do that, I just wanted to sort of recap or confirm that under the PPA, the payment mechanism compensates for capacity in the form of a component A and B. So for the fixed costs associated with establishing the plants, both O&M as well as your capital cost recovery charge rate, and then also compensates for energy. And with regard to the energy component, it is with regard to the fuel costs and as well as variable O&M. There's also a compensation for ancillary services and startups included in the full payment mechanism. The discussion today, however, is going to focus on the clarifications that were sought from the market around the gas pricing mechanism. So maybe we can go to the next slide, because I think on this slide, this has already been covered by what Lena previously said. So just to confirm, of course, we have had some clarity-seeking questions around the introduction of what we call the fixed fuel charge rates. Those have got two types of indexation associated with them. For US-based costs, those will be a US CPI, and then the other part will be indexed to the South African CPI. We have also had some clarity sought on the requirement to provide details around how there will be a reduction affected in the CCR in the event that once there's maturity and there's more fuel passing through the gas infrastructure, and there's a reduction in those costs associated with the throughput of volumes, how that has to be addressed. So we have provided or will provide soon an Appendix 3F that will set out the information that needs to be supplied by the bidders with regard to how that kind of benefit will also flow through into the tariff. And just for clarity's sake, the fuel charge rate components, they do not change as the throughput of volumes or the use of the LNG infrastructure increases. These charges are indexed to the particular commodity indexes, either Brent or Henry Hub or the NBP. But as I said, Schedule 9 of the PPA provides more clarity on these issues. So if we look at the change in the formula for the fuel charge rate, so I think previously the original formula was based on a percentage of Brent crude and a percentage of Henry Hub, and adjusted for movement in the monthly monthly movements calculated based on the maximum gas price energy formula as set out by the regulator compared to the base. We have, however, updated this formula to now also include the NBP, but also to include the movement based on the average of the 3 months preceding, the average of the 3 months preceding movements, etc. So the addition of the NBP is also to cater for an element of short-term pricing from the bidders, whereas we anticipate a long-term contracting. We also recognize that there is within this the structure and requirements around the minimum load commitments, there will be a requirement for a shorter term procurement. So on top of that, we have added a fuel fixed cost charge rate to reflect the cost associated with the infrastructure that needs to be in place to bring the gas to the plant. So basically shipping, terminal gas pipelines, and in the case of the US LNG, the liquefaction cost. So this is a new introduction. And as I've previously said, it caters for elements associated, elements that are based and indexed to the US inflation rate, as well as then those that are based to the local. And from this point of view, I think we have also previously indicated that the element that is associated with the NERSA regulated costs will be adjusted based on those NERSA recalculations or reviews, etc., and adjusted to CPI, whereas the other side of the element will be a pass-through and adjusted to the US inflation rate. Next slide. I think on top of this, important to just refresh those of you that are familiar with it, the structure, the term of the PPA is for 20 years. We will, as part of the bids that we receive, evaluate the price per rand per megawatt hour. The evaluation price will include the cost of the contracting, the capacity, the energy generated, as well as ancillary services. And we have a specific appendix in the pack that needs to be completed by each bidder. And basically also to cater for possible flexibility within the load commitment, we will have the underlying price A at 60% and at price B, underlying price B at 50%, and it will be the evaluation price will be an average then between those two load factors. It must be fully indexed to CPI. We will be issuing a briefing note that updates the CPI to the new inflation targets as said by the Minister of Finance. I am aware that currently in the document that it's still at 4.7, so but it will be updated to the new targets. And then for the US CPI, for purposes of the bid, we provide an assumption of 2%. Yes, I think just also important to note that the base date for all the proposals, the pricing proposals, must now be April 2026, aligned to the May 2026 bid submission date. Thank you. Next slide. Again, to note that the evaluation price will also be weighted between the cost of the capacity and the energy, which will contribute 80% towards the price, as well as then the cost of the ancillary services that will contribute the further 20%. So in essence, it will be calculated by determining the net present value of the nominal payments for each of the components of underlying price A and B, and then also the net present value of the nominal payments for the provisions of ancillary services. And that will then be weighted on the basis of 80-20 as set out there. Next slide, thank you. Also, just to again confirm that the price that is submitted at bid will be adjusted at commercial close. The adjustment will relate to movements in the relevant foreign exchange rates from bid submission to close date for purposes of the CapEx and capital expenditure, any particular movements in interest rates that happened during that period, and then also any movements in grid connection cost between CEL cost and then eventually final budget quote cost that is set at commercial close. Again, to note that post commercial close, there will be no adjustments to the fixed components, component A and B in the PPA other than CPI, and the adjustments to the energy pricing will be as I've just explained, ensuring that it's a pass-through and it reflects the relevant movement in commodity as well as exchange rates. Thank you.
Thank you, Elsa. Thank you so much for such an insightful presentation. By now, we have covered both the legal as well as the financial qualification criteria amendments. And as such, I just want to remind the participants to please make sure that they do log their questions on the Q&A, and as was indicated in the beginning, we will endeavor to respond by the date that will be communicated at the end of this session. Now, as we move towards the end of this presentation, we then have as our last presenter, Mr. Crescent Mushwana. Crescent is the head of technical within the IPP office. Crescent is going to take us through the amendments that relate to the technical qualification criteria. Over to you, Crescent. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Program Director, and good morning, everyone. So I'll take you briefly through the technical amendments that were made. And of course, these were covered partly within the legal presentation and also the finance presentation. But two aspects that were raised by the market for consideration was the load commitment or the load factor. The initial one that we had in our RFP was 40 to 65%, with 40 being minimum and 65% being the maximum at the time. However, through the engagements that we have had and also considering also the current IRP that has come out, clearly specifying what the load factor should be for the gas program, especially gas bid window 1 specifically. 50% was now adopted as the new load factor going forward. And of course, the PPA 10 stays as is. Another aspect that was raised were the startups. And the startups with the initial one, we had initially minimum of 730 startups and a maximum of 1,460 in the initial RFP. And through the engagements, of course, considering that the startups have got an effect in terms of the operations and even in terms of costs for the power plant. So the startups now, even considering without compromising the flexibility that the facilities need to provide to the power system, we have agreed that the startups will be 520 per annum. And of course, now this would be 520 per annum in terms of the minimum startups. Excuse me, this would be the maximum startups, because previously we had a minimum of 730, but now we're looking at maximum of 520 per annum. Can we go to the next slide? And then further clarity was requested with regards to clarifying the heat rate that is specified in the RFP, which is 8,200 kilojoules per kilowatt, whether this is lower heat value or higher heat value. And we had to confirm based on that our RFP is focusing on the power generation. So any heat value that speaks to the power generation in terms of making sure that we get efficiency from the power plant for the generation purposes, we'll be looking at LHV in terms of the specification that we have set for 8,200 kilojoules per kilowatt hour. So this is a clarification which now has been included as part of the clarification in the updated RFP. And also additionally, there was a clarification in terms of confirming the number of starts and also how that relates even in terms of the impact in terms of how the payment will look like. Of course, we had to confirm further that the number of starts, now it's 520 per year. However, there was an additional requirement in order to provide the flexibility that the system operator needs to have to also allow for 4 starts per day, and this will only be utilized if required. But there should be capability to provide those startups per day. And of course, the number of starts, the 520, are broken down into what starts, warm starts, and cold starts as given, and the summate to 520 per year in terms of the assumption that we have, and also the aspect in terms of the evaluation, the 60 to 50% load factor, which need to be considered as part of the key evaluation parameter. And all those aspects are covered in our briefing note 15 and the JB appendices that are provided as well. So these were the key aspects that were covered. And of course, in terms of the operations of the power plant, the startups were the key issues that were raised, and also the load factor. However, aspects that speaks to the instantaneous reserves, regulating reserves, as we had in our initial RFP, those aspects, they still remain. And also aspects that speaks to the rated power capability as the South African Grid Code, all those aspects remain. And the financial information that is provided in the JB forms will speak to how those calculations are done in terms of accounting for instantaneous reserves and regulating reserves and how the payments will be done. So those are the key aspects I wanted to raise. I'll hand back to the program director. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Crescent. Thank you, Des. As you would notice, as I indicated just before Crescent, that we are moving towards the final lap of the presentations. So that was our last presentation. And you will agree with me that they are quite substantial, given the amendments that have been made in the RFP. And we do hope that you'll be able to sort of comprehend all those amendments. And if there are any follow-up questions that you still have, please feel free to provide those questions in writing as per the communication protocol contained in the RFP. Now, in the next 60 minutes or so, we'll then move into the final stretch of this session, which is the Q&A. And once more, if you do have any burning question or issue that you want to raise for the attention of the office and the department, we do urge you to post it on the Q&A platform. And as indicated, we will endeavor to get all those questions answered as soon as possible. And some of them will then be able to cover those through today's session. As I indicated, due to time constraints, we will not be able to cover all the questions that we have received. Now, if we move now back to the Q&A sessions, then I will invite our speakers to please be on the lookout for their respective questions. And we will then kick off all these questions on matters that relate to the issues that have been raised. Precious did touch on the 5 main issues that were raised by the potential bidders, and upon which all these amendments are based. Now, the questions that we have received, there are upwards of about 60 or so. And what we have done then is to categorize a number of them, because also there are duplications according to various themes. And those themes, they range from issues related to the supply of the molecules, all things pricing, whether it's pricing related to the fuel itself, or pricing related to the gas infrastructure, or pricing related to the ancillary services. And then the other issues relate to the technical requirements. Some of them relate to the requirements for the consortia that are expected to participate, and others are related to environmental authorization. You will recall that Ms. Mangondo did touch on those requirements. And then others touch on timelines, Precious did allude to the timelines that have been approved by the procurer for this program leading up to the bid submission date. And then others, they do relate to the issue of the load factor, the capacity commitment, as well as the dispatch profiles. And then, of course, there are issues that are general in nature that will then also be in a position to respond to as part of our briefing and note process. Now, in coming back to the questions that I've just spoken about, please allow me to invite our speakers once more. I will start with Lina. In no order of importance, I'll just throw the questions as we have received. Lina, there is a question that wants to understand if fuel switching, for example, gas or diesel, will be allowed, and if so, under what operating conditions? Over to you, Lina.
You are, if you have a previously brownfield project, you can convert that project into a greenfields project. And in that case, the infrastructure would have to be, it would require new infrastructure on a previously brownfield project. However, having said that, you will not be allowed to fuel switch. You have to reconstruct a project that uses then gas infrastructure on a project site that was previously used for a project that perhaps used diesel. Thank you.
Thank you, Lila. Maybe perhaps whilst you are still on the floor, let me just have this follow-up question for you. Now, in terms of the gas supply again, are long-term gas supply agreements required at bid submission, or they will only be required at financial close?
You need to demonstrate the commitment of the fuel supplier through the commitment letter that must be provided by the fuel supplier. It is not a requirement specifically to have entered into a fuel supply agreement at bid submission.
Thank you, Lina. Maybe let's give you a break and then switch over to Elsa. Elsa, the next question is directed at you. It also relates to metals pricing. Will the LNG availability, the pricing thereof, as well as indexation guidance thereto be provided to the bidders? That is, now will the bidders be guided in terms of how to deal with issues of LNG availability, the pricing thereof, as well as indexation? Over to you, Elsa.
Thank you, Program Director. Yes, I think it's important to note that the bidder is responsible to secure their fuel. That is their responsibility. In our price indexation, we do cater for Henry Hub, Brent crude, as well as the national balancing point. And at closer to bid submission, we will be issuing a JB form that will provide a forward curve for those three indexes. And the reason for us providing that as well is to ensure that when we receive our bids, that we have an equal playing field, that everybody uses the same guidance as provided. But that will be provided closer to bid submission by ourselves. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Elsa. Maybe whilst you are still on the platform, perhaps then the follow-up question is that will there be any benchmarks or caps for gas pricing that will serve as a guide once more for the bidders' assumptions?
Yeah, I think linked to the previous response, it's a bidder's prerogative and to factor in all the risks associated with his pricing proposal and the particular benchmarks that they use, other than us providing the forward-looking curve for purposes of bidding. There's no other elements or caps that we currently providing. The new gas pricing mechanism are a pass-through based on the indexation, but again, a reminder to indicate that the indexes selected and the split between the different indexes at bid submission will be fixed for the duration of the PPA. Thank you.
Thank you, Elsa. Thank you so much. Crescent, let me then turn to you with the next question regarding the minimum technical specifications. So the question for you is, what minimum technical specs are required for the power block equipment? Over to you, Crescent.
Okay, thanks, Kanyiso. Yeah, the way our RFP is put together, we are looking at the entire facility in terms of the requirements that are specified. And if we look at what was specified in Volume 3, Part 1, Clause 3.2.12, there is a specific requirement in terms of how the plant should perform. And those requirements are looking at the entire facility. However, there are also additional requirements that speak to the performance of the generators that you use in terms of ancillary services and minimum generation requirements, the ramp rates, and all the like. So all those aspects really speak to what we expect. Of course, at the end of the day, is the contracted capacity that we want to have from the plant. However, we do not specify what the power block should be. However, the design that is provided should ensure that all those requirements are met in terms of ancillary services, startups, minimum generation requirements, to make sure that the contracted capacity is able to be delivered. Yeah, so those will be aspects that will have to be considered in the design in terms of what the power block should contain. However, the specifications that we have in Volume 3, Part 1, 3.2.12 should be complied with. Thank you.
Now, thank you, Chris. Perhaps maybe related to that, can the bidders then propose any alternative technical configurations for as long as those configurations meet the performance parameters?
Of course, it speaks to the same point that I made, that those parameters will look at the entire facility. So in terms of how the design is done, that's up to the bidder. In terms of the technologies that they use, that definitely be up to the bidder. But the performance requirements that are specified should be met. And of course, I mean, as a minimum, of course, those aspects that are specified even in the code in terms of what, of course, we don't really specify in our documents in terms of reactive power capability. We just mentioned that there should be a grid code compliance in terms of the power factor, both leading and lagging, that should be complied with. So those aspects the bidder will have to consider as part of their design, and then design what will be compliant with our program. Yeah, so we do not specify in terms of how the design should be like, but the requirements, we should provide enough guidance to meet the requirements.
Now, thank you so much, Crescent. Maybe then let me then turn back to Elsa around the gas supply related matters again. Elsa, the question for you then seeks to understand if bidders will be penalized in the event of gas supply disruptions that affect the plant availability.
Thank you, Program Director. The bidders will be compensated for capacity made available, and there will be a deduction for non-availability or a reduction in availability. In the event that gas supply is the cause of being unavailable, that will be perform part of those deductions. The ensuring that there are sufficient supply of gas available to ensure that the plant can be available is in terms of the RFP is the risk of the bidder. Thank you.
No, thank you, Elsa. Maybe whilst you are still on the platform, then just to understand an issue around the structuring of the tariff. Now, the question then seeks to understand if the proposed tariff structure will then account for variable fuel. I do know that it's something that you have touched on, but I believe that is one of those very important issues that need to be re-emphasized. Can you please take care of that question, Elsa?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think this is one of the key amendments that we have made in terms of the fuel cost used by the plant to generate the electricity. The cost associated with that will be a pass-through. It will be based on those indexes put forward by bidders as part of their bid submission in that proportions that they put it forward. But the movements associated with market commodity price movements, FX movements is a pass-through based on the average cost of the 3 months preceding. So in terms of the adjustments that we've made, we have ensured that the gas pricing is market reflects what's happening in the market and can be passed through, and therefore the bidders are not exposed on that. Thank you.
No, thank you, Elsa. Maybe then let's give you a break once more. Lina, we are back to you. We just want to understand a question around the participation by the potential consortia in the RFP. Now, the question then seeks to understand if the RFP allows for multiple bids from the same consortia. Lina?
Thank you, Chair. The RFP does not prohibit bidders from submitting multiple bids for different projects, provided bidders take cognizant of the requirements of clause 16.7 of Part A of the RFP, which says that you can participate in more than one bid, in 2 or more bid responses. However, in so doing, it has to be done with substantially the same entities or consortium members, and rather restricts bidders from participating across different groups of affiliated bid responses where the members are not the same as are substantially different, as it were. Thank you.
Now, thank you so much, Lina. The next question, Lina, for you, which I think also you had touched on it as one of the 5 key issues that were raised by the market, but because of its importance in this RFP, I do believe that it's something that we need to amplify once more. Now, the question then seeks to understand how will the program evaluate readiness where environmental approvals are still in progress. So at bid submission, environmental authorization has not been bedded. So how will that be handled at evaluation stage? Over to you, Lina.
Thank you. The RFP in clause 4 of the RFP requires that a bidder submit an environmental authorization issued in terms of the National Energy Management Act for the project, and that environmental authorization needs to have been in place at the bid submission date, and such EA or environmental authorization should include the project and supporting infrastructure. That EA is to be issued in the name of the project company or there must be written confirmation provided by the holder of such EA that it will assign the environmental authorization to the project company before commercial close. I'd also like to reflect that bidders are required to submit a detailed independent legal opinion confirming that they have obtained all key environmental authorizations, which includes the environmental authorization I've just spoken to for the project and supporting infrastructure, and that others have progressed sufficiently so as not to delay financial close or project implementation. As such, a project that does not have an approval, an environmental authorization, will not comply with the requirements of the RFP in relation to environmental authorizations. Thanks.
Now, thank you, Lina. Maybe then the last one from you on this round, it's more educational than anything else, and I think it's perhaps maybe it will benefit other potential participants on the platform. So, what timelines must be, or I mean, milestones must be achieved before financial close?
Okay. Just generally the milestones. Obviously, once a bidder is appointed as a preferred bidder, one of the key sort of elements that they have to advance is from a cost estimate letter to a budget quote with the relevant grid provider. Subsequent to that budget quote process, them receiving the budget quote, there's a confirmation or acceptance process of the cost and scope in the as reflected in the budget quote. They have to enter into relevant connection agreements with the grid provider. Parallel to that, they also need to obtain a generation license from NERSA, to the extent that there's a requirement for a gas license. If there's a trader, then that gas trading license must also be obtained similarly from NERSA. They also need to advance all project-related activities within their control, which speak to them concluding agreements as shareholders, financing agreements with lenders, they must enter into contracts with their respective contractors, being the EPC, O&M, and with the fuel supplier, and any other agreements required to enable them to ultimately conclude the power purchase agreement, which supports their obligations under both the power purchase agreement and the implementation agreement. Subsequent to them having complied with those elements, in particular on the BQ, then they would then enter into a power purchase agreement with NTCSA as the buyer, a implementation agreement with the department. That implementation agreement seeks to regulate the economic development commitments that they would have included as part of their bid, as part of the competitive elements of their bid. Those are translated into contractual commitments for which they will have to be monitored, and to the extent that there's non-compliance for the term of the contract, there are then penalties that accrue in terms of the implementation agreement. That implementation agreement also sets out the scope of the government support for the particular project, and they will also concurrently enter into a direct agreement which allows lenders or reserves certain step-in rights for lenders in the event of default by the IPP as a seller under either the implementation agreement or the power purchase agreement. Thank you.
Now, thank you, Lina. Thank you so much. Crescent, let's turn back to you. Just to give us some insights on matters related to the ramp-up rates as well as the startup times. The question for your Crescent seeks to understand what are the expected ramp rates startup times as well as the operational response for these projects. Crescent?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Program Director. With regards to the ramp-up rates, we have them clearly specified in our Volume 3, Part 1, Clause 3.2.13. Some of the aspects to consider is in terms of ramping up, although we've got the stats that are clearly defined, however, in terms of ramp-ups that we'll speak to, starting from synchronization, we do have a limitation of within less than 15 minutes. That should be possible in terms of ramping up, and also to ramp up from 0 to minimum generation requirement, where the min gen is around 25%. We should be able to do that in around 18% of the contracted capacity per minute. That's what we have in our clauses, and also to ramp up from min gen to 100% of the facility is at the same rate of 18% of the contracted capacity per minute, and also to ramp up to full synchronization should be done in around 180 minutes. So those aspects are clearly specified in our technical criteria in terms of ramping up. And of course, within the context of operating the unit for the 520 starts per year as a maximum, and 4 starts per day being possible as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Crescent. Maybe then also another question related to the operating regime for under this RFP. So are there any minimum operating hour obligations that the bidders need to be wary of?
Yeah, in terms of minimum operating hours, I will speak to what we have specified for instantaneous reserve and regulating reserve in terms of operating hours. Of course, the load factor itself at 50%, that is a guidance in terms of the operating hours that will be required for the plant, of course, depending on how it's used. However, for instantaneous reserves and also regulating reserves, we've specified 3,723 hours per annum. That should be possible. And also we have specified for instantaneous reserves to be able to respond to 155 events per annum. So these aspects will guide in terms of how the operation is done within the context of the load factor, meeting the reserves, and of course, there will be aspects of how the financing or how the financial aspects will look like in terms of having this type of operation, which will be part of the finance aspect. But these are the requirements specified in our Volume 3 specification under Clause 3.2/12. And those aspects can be taken into account as part of the design. Thank you.
Thank you, Crescent. Maybe perhaps then the last one for you again. I think this one relates to the thorny issue of grid connection. So how will grid access be managed to avoid delays that are caused by transmission constraints?
Yeah, with regards to grid access, of course, this remains the responsibility of the bidder to manage with the transmission network owner, that is NTCSA. As we expect, most of these plants will be transmission connected. And of course, there is an established process as per all bid windows in terms of different technologies. There's an application for a CEL that needs to be done, which will be followed by a BQ post the preferred bidder their announcement. So those aspects are for the bidder to manage. But of course, with regards to where the bidder connects, there will be, in some cases, upstream investments that transmission will need to embark on. And those aspects, we expect that they should be reflected in the CCL that the bidders apply for. So those risks will be known upfront by the different bidders, but that is something for them to manage. But of course, for our program, we'll take into account what is envisaged in the CEL in terms of meeting our timeline in terms of connecting to the grid or the COD. So those aspects they have to manage. We know there are risks, and of course, our program is site agnostic. So there's no specific grid point which we'll say is less risky. However, based on the TDP, the GCCA, of course, the current one is outdated. There'll be a new one coming soon. Those who should be able to provide guidance. But at the end of the day, the CEL process will provide further clarity in terms of what risks are there in terms of the grid constraints. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris and Elsa. Let's turn back to you again and touch on pricing related issues. I'm flagging these issues because I just want it to be clear in terms of the PPA risk profile, which elements are the bidder's responsibility and which ones are can be best managed by the buyer. So it's important that everybody on the platform is clear about some of these issues. Of course, we cannot cover all of them, but I think there are those ones that I think we need to touch on them. Now, the question then that has been asked, it reads as follows: how should the bidders factor fuel procurement risk into their pricing models, given that the sellers carry the fuel risk? Elsa?
Thank you, Program Director. I think that's the key feature of this procurement is that the bidders are required to secure their fuel availability to ensure that it is delivered to the site, and that they have to contract with a supplier to ensure that that's in place. That risk is therefore that of the so all the contracting, supply and delivery risks forms part of their proposal, and that is their risk. With regard to the fuel pricing formula, the amendments provides for the recovery of the cost associated with the fuel logistics as well as the transport via what we've now introduced, the fixed fuel capacity charge rate. And then, as I've previously said, for the movements in commodity and foreign exchange is also then passed through. But yes, to your question, bidders should mitigate the risks associated with the uncertainty in fuel logistics and transportation. The formulas we've provided caters for and ensures that there are mechanisms to manage those risks. Thank you.
Now, thank you so much, Elsa. Maybe then a related question that also talks to the risks profile of the RFP that is contained in the RFP. Then the next question then seeks to understand then again, what assumptions then should bidders use regarding gas storage, pressure, as well as the daily or hourly gas deliverability?
There's no assumptions provided on these matters in the document with regard to storage, pressure, daily and hourly gas deliverability. That forms part of the bidder's proposal, and they are best placed to manage that risk, and that's the structure in the RFP. So we do not provide any assumptions on those matters.
Thank you, Elsa. Then let me turn to Lina again. Lina, this one relates to the staggering whether of the commissioning of the units within a specific plant. So the question then seeks to understand if there is an option to consider staging or phasing the COD dates for the plant under this RFP. Lina? Are you winning, Lina?
Thank you, Kanyiso. There is no restriction to staging. There is an option where you can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, Lina, you are loud and clear. You can go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Lina, I can hear you. I hope everybody else can hear you too.
Okay, sorry. I thought you'd miss me there, Chair. With regards to the PPA does allow a project to be okay. The PPA allow projects to be
Sorry, Lina, but you are breaking now. Maybe you can try again.
Online and stage that is contemplated in the PPA.
Sorry, Lina, maybe can you start from the beginning?
Can you hear me now?
Can you start from the beginning? Sorry about that.
Okay. Okay. The PPA does allow projects to be brought online in stages. So that is contemplated within the PPA.
Okay. Lina, I'm not sure if you cut off or... Okay, maybe let's go back to Elsa. We'll come back to Lina. Elsa, again, the issue of pricing related issues is coming up once more. Then the question then seeks to understand again, how should bidders account for uncertainty in fuel logistics and transportation pricing? And I'm trying to underscore the importance of the responses to these questions, because if there's any misunderstanding, then the bidder's response may miss the mark. So it's important that they get to be addressed and responded to accordingly. So how should the bidders account for uncertainty in fuel logistics as well as transportation pricing? Elsa?
Thank you, Program Director. I think I've tried to be clear on this, but I'll try again. The bidders are required to secure their own fuel and delivery to the site. So therefore, they are required to manage the pricing associated with those uncertainties. We have in the formulas provided for a fuel fixed charge, a capacity rate under which these cost elements are then recovered. That formula provides both for US indexed cost elements associated with shipping, etc., and the cost for that to be passed through. And adjusted and indexed to US inflation, as well as for local components of that cost, which will then be CPI indexed. So I think the introduction of this new concept of the fixed fuel capacity charge rate into the formula and allowing the different components, recognizing both local as well as imported components in that, does cater and assist with the uncertainty associated with those pricings. Thank you.
No, thank you, Elsa. Lina, I hope your network has been resolved. Can we then turn back to you with our questioning? Maybe if you can help us just to go back to the response to the question that was asked previously regarding the stage commercial operation dates. Lina?
Thank you. I was indicating that the PPA does allow for projects to be brought online in phases. It makes provision for partial completion and then full completion in that respect.
Thank you, Lina. However, the long stop COD remains. It's unlike then we can then provide for any sort of concessions to go beyond the set COD. You can commission those in stages up until the COD that is conducted for. Thank you so much, Lina. Maybe then, whilst you are still on the platform again, we can then just switch a gear a little bit and touch on ED related aspects. Now, the question seeks to understand if bidders are required to provide ED commitments that are specifically linked to the gas-related industries. Lina?
Thank you. The ED commitments relate to the it relates to the generation facility, which is the scope of the project. We don't consider the gas-related elements as part of the ED commitments. Thank you.
Thank you, Lina. Maybe then still on ED-related matters, let's then turn to one of the most important topics in the country that relate to which is local production and content. So the question seeks to understand what is the local content threshold for this procurement round. That is the threshold that is prescribed in under the RFP for gas bid window 1. Lina? Hi, Lina, did you get that? It looks like we are struggling on the other side.
We don't have look. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you please start from the beginning, Lina?
Can you hear me, Jay?
Yes, I can hear you now, but please start from the beginning.
I was saying that on local content, bidders are there are no specific thresholds that apply. Bidders are in line with the total project spend anticipated for the local content. There is a schedule that they are required to complete to indicate their local content requirements, both in terms of the specific component of that local content spend.
No, thank you, Lina. Thank you so much. Crescent, let me just turn back to you again and touch on one of the very, very tricky subjects under the various bid windows that bidders sometimes have to contend with, which is issues related to securing the grid. Now, the question seeks to understand that if there are any grid capacity allocations. I mean, if the grid capacity allocations are site specific or technology specific. Crescent?
Okay, thank you, Program Director. Yeah, on this one, whether the grid capacity allocations are site specific or technology specific, I would say, well, there are no specific grid capacity that is allocated for a specific technology. Yeah, as an example, if you look at the GCC, it will speak about it's for generation connection capacity. So basically, it's technology agnostic in terms of what can be connected. However, once one applies for a CEL, that's where some aspects that your technology has in terms of impact on the grid will come to the fore, in terms of how much of that grid capacity you can be able to take advantage of for your power plant. So, and those are the aspects that, of course, will come clear once people apply for the CEL. However, in general, there are no site-specific or technology-specific grid allocations. But of course, specific sites based on the grid availability, because there are some sites in the country in terms of specific points on the grid where the grid is available, there could be advantages there in terms of course, the latest GSA, which is about to be released, will serve as a good guidance on that. However, those capacities are not for specific technologies as such. And as I've said, once they apply for the CEM, there will be clarity in terms of how the technology impacts the grid and what is required in terms of grid services from that technology, and will influence how much capacity can be allocated for that technology. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Crescent. That's quite useful. As I indicated earlier, the issues related to grid capacity allocation, they are very important for these projects to come online, and as such, the clarity there too is very critical that we also provide through this process. Now, Crescent, there is a question that has been raised, and once more, notwithstanding that we have touched on as part of the responses to the 5 key issues that were raised by the potential bidders, it's a question related to the load factor. Now, this question seeks to understand what is the maximum and the minimum load factors that the bidders may propose. Underline may propose. Crescent?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Program Director. I mean, at the moment, of course, in the previous RFP, we had the minimum of 40, maximum of 65, which set the parameters. But currently, we only have got 50%. And at the moment, we will not entertain proposals which are outside what we have specified. However, when they do the financial evaluation in terms of like looking at 50, 60% in terms of checking what, in terms of comparing the bids, I think that's the only thing that we currently have in terms of testing various load factors. But any plant that is, of course, built or facility that is built should be able to do higher load factors as and when required. However, the commitment for the minimum of 50%, that's what we can put on the table. We can't entertain other load factors except what we have put on, because this is different from what we had previously, where we had 40 minimum and 65 max. At the moment, we do not have that.
No, thank you, Crescent. As you have stated, it's quite important that as we do the evaluation, we need to compare apples with apples. So once we allow variability in terms of load factor, then there will be challenges. Maybe whilst you are still on the floor, Crescent, this question seeks to understand if annual or monthly load factor profiles will be made available.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, in our RFP currently, I think a specific clause in our volume 3, part 1, I think it's clause 3.2.2. We specifically state that the load factor at the moment, what we're considering will be a commitment of 50% on a monthly basis, and it will amount to the same even on an annual basis as well. Of course, we do understand that load factors may vary from month to month based on what the requirements are of the system operator. But on a monthly basis, on an annual basis, we expect it to be that commitment of 50%, and no deviation from that in terms of what will be evaluated. So that is monthly, and on an annual basis, summing to 50% as the commitment.
Now, thank you so much, Crescent. I think on that note, we are really moving towards the tail end of this session. There are some announcements that are very critical, which I believe will need to be made. So we need to provide for that as part of our program. We have covered quite a lot of questions that were received from the various potential bidders, and we also recognize those questions that have been placed on the chat box. I must confirm and make an undertaking that we will definitely provide a Q&A, which then sort of covers all the questions that have been placed on the Q&A platform during this call. So please don't be despondent if your question has not been addressed directly. As I indicated, we do have a limitation of time. So all we are trying to avoid is a situation where we come across as we are prioritizing certain questions over the others. So the safest way is to make sure that we do respond to all these questions at the same time through a Q&A, which will be made available on the IPPO website, and made sure that I will make sure that it gets to be communicated broadly as well to everybody who has accessed and bought the RFP. Now, as we move towards closing, perhaps maybe let me just bring Precious once more, just to give us a sense around the most important milestone. I mean the issue around the bidders engagement. You will recall that we did have a bidders conference after the RFP was issued. I think, if I'm not mistaken, around January. This is a follow-up session after the RFP amendments have been issued. As you have noted, they are quite substantial, and as such, it was important for the department to convene this session and afford potential bidders an opportunity to engage further on the RFP amendments. So the question then that is before us, Precious, is whether there will be further bidder engagement sessions that are going to be held before the RFP is finalized. So it's a two-part question: finalization of the RFP as well as the bidders engagement session. Precious, can you please help us with that?
Thank you, Program Director. And I think I'm fully with you when you indicated that the intention is to address all the questions, and mindful of the time constraints today, we will not be able to do so. We will definitely do so through a briefing note. So considering the magnitude of the amendments that followed the initial RFP that was issued to the market, we saw it necessary and prudent to have this briefing session in this manner. However, we really do not envisage a further webinar under this RFP. The next steps will be to respond to the queries through a written briefing notes as we aim to close the RFP at the end of May 2026. Thank you.
No, thank you, Precious. That's quite useful. As I indicated earlier, we are moving towards the closing of this session, and I did allude to some of the announcements that we are going to make, which I believe is very important for everyone to note. Now, one of those amendments is announcements is that you will note that under the presentation that was made by Ms. Mangondo Legal, there was a schedule of briefing notes that have been issued to date. And amongst those briefing notes, there's briefing note 11 that is reported as yet to be issued. We do recognize and we want to place this on record that this briefing note is going to be issued. It's not going to be dropped, notwithstanding the fact that a substantial volume of questions that were raised in that briefing note have been addressed through the RFP amendments. But however, to close the loop, we will then respond and provide appropriate responses in the briefing note and in a manner that will make it easier for the potential respondents to understand. Of course, we are not going to repeat what has been included on the RFP amendments. The best we can do is just to indicate that this has been covered in briefing note 15. I mean, in the RFP amendments. So this briefing note 11, together with the Q&A for today's session, they will both be issued by no later than the 10th of December. So in 2 weeks' time, we will endeavor to provide responses so that as the potential bidders engage with the RFP amendments, they do have all the responses that they need to, at least up to now, to be able to package their comprehensive bid responses. However, the period for providing the written clarifications, it's still open, as you would note also in terms of the timeline of the timetable. So post this session, there's still an opportunity for bidders to send those written questions to the IPP office, and then the office will also then endeavor to respond. But I just want to caution that please do be wary of the sort of construction downtime period, during which then we will not be able to sort of respond. And as such, we can only be able to, once that period starts, then we can only be able to provide responses early in the new year. Now, the other announcement that I would like to make is that currently, as you would note, the RFP was issued, amendments that were issued, and the department took a conscious decision to afford potential bidders enough time to consider these RFP amendments, not less than 6 months. As you would know, the bid submission date is the 29th of May, 2026. We issued the amendments on the 20th of October, 2025. That's more than 6 months. So the reason why I'm highlighting this timeline is because as we progress with this RFP, there is absolutely no intention from the procurer's side to sort of move around this bid submission date, especially given the fact that this capacity is earmarked to come online as reflected in the IRP 2025. So I would urge everybody to make sure that you, at the back of your mind, you keep the 29th of May 2026, as well as other key dates that are reflected in the RFP, so that we are then able to sort of take this process up to its logical conclusion. Now, at this point, then I would also like to then thank our speakers for going through those comprehensive amendments to the RFP that was issued by the department in December 2023. As you have noted, the amendments are quite substantial, as I indicated earlier. And we do hope that the information that we have shared today in detail will then assist the potential bidders in their preparations for packaging of their bid responses. And also then I would also like to thank the ever hardworking energy family. So the energy family is quite broad, but I would really like to sort of highlight these key stakeholders, which is the Department of Electricity and Energy as the mandate holder, and the procurer of this capacity, energy and ancillary services per the determination that was issued by the minister, I think around 2020. And then also the IPP office team that is supported by the advisors, our advisors that come locally as well as globally, who have taken their time to support the office as it sort of toiled around the detailed questions that have been received from the market, trying to provide responses thereto. And I cannot forget the input and the collaboration that we have received from the buyer, which is the National Transmission Company South Africa, as well as Eskom. They have always made sure that we do work together and ensure the success of this process, because at the end of the day, our end goal is to ensure that the country's security of supply is intact. On that note, I note that we are almost 10 minutes away from our scheduled time. But maybe before I close, Precious, if you want to come in and give any few closing remarks, you have a few minutes to do so. Over to you, Precious.
Thank you, Program Director. I would say the team has done a job in responding to the queries that they have been provided. And I'm really grateful. I think you omitted NERSA as part of your closing and thank remarks there. But be as it may, they are part of the family. I think we send our gratitude and support from all the stakeholders involved. And thank you, the IPPO office team, for putting this together and ensure that everything runs smoothly today, and we are able to engage the prospective bidders and the market largely. And thank you for the participants as well. I think they've been submitting this information and ensuring that this timeous submission of queries also assisted the team internally on covering the points and put together, like our program director indicated, into themes and see how best we can try to make this possible. With that, program director, I think great work and the team, and think the time for all the participants and the broader DEE family. Thank you. Back to program director.
Yeah. No, thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Precious. Of course, yes, the regulator, they've been very, very useful, and I'm sure everyone will see how the issues around the fuel indexation have been adjusted to cater for the South African context. We are very, very grateful for NERSA's input in that regard. On that note, please allow me to say the session is hereby adjourned. Thank you so much. We will stick to the dates that we have committed to from the Ipppp office side, and we hope that from the potential bidder side, you will also keep an eye on the bid submission date of the 29th of May, 2026. Thank you for your time, and the session is adjourned. Thank you.